What if the boy who lived lost his soul? What if the boy who lived didn't? What if the most guarded child in the wizarding world met a fate Dumbledore himself called worse than death? Today, we deconstruct a timeline where Harry Potter survives the Dementor's kiss. Picture the lake in third year, cold, windless. The surface is a sheet of black glass, as Sirius Black lies helpless on the shore, and hundreds of Dementors descend. In canon, a blinding silver stag erupts from Harry's wand and scatters them. Here, the turning point arrives a heartbeat earlier. One Dementor reaches him first. It lowers its hood. The world contracts. Sound doesn't fade so much as evacuate. The screams in Harry's head are vacuumed out of reality. That rotting mouth seals over his. There is no struggle worth mentioning, because against this kind of magic, muscle and will are irrelevant. Harry's body arches once, violently, and then something essential tears free. The core issue is mechanical. The kiss does not kill the body, it extracts the soul. In this fracture of the timeline, the Dementor drinks not only Harry's consciousness, but also the fragment of Voldemort lodged in his scar. For a second, the lake is an execution ground and an exorcism site. When the creature drifts back, sated, the most famous boy in Britain is still breathing. He simply is no longer Harry. In the original series, the boy who lived is shorthand for improbable hope. The infant who survived the killing curse, the child whose continued existence proves that Voldemort can be beaten. But reality in this version is much harsher. The subtext is brutal. The legend remains upright, warm, and medically stable, yet his eyes track nothing. His wand hand never twitches, and no spell can reach whatever is missing. The wizarding world now has a new mythic title to whisper about. Not the boy who lived, but the boy who walks without a soul. Does Voldemort still fear him, or does he laugh at the empty vessel that once threatened his power? More importantly, what does that vessel do to everyone who loved the original occupant? Imagine Ron at the hospital wing bed, making jokes that land in a void, waiting for the familiar spark of annoyance that never comes. Hermione cycling through every charm, potion, and obscure precedent, refusing to accept that there is no known reversal, that even Dumbledore calls this a terminal psychological absence. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by death, but by its refusal to offer closure. The Order now faces an obscene dilemma. Harry's body is a symbol, a rallying point, a breathing prophecy, yet the prophecy itself is suddenly ambiguous. Neither can live while the other survives, never specifies a soul. If the hero is reduced to an empty shell while Voldemort endures, has the prediction failed, or has it twisted into something much darker? As the divergence is finalized at that lakeside, one question hangs over the coming war. Does this fate end the conflict early, or does it inaugurate a new phase, where an unconscious Harry becomes either the ultimate martyr, or the most dangerous weapon on the board? Understanding the Dementor's kiss, a fate worse than death. To understand what has just happened at the lake, the timeline has to slow down. What, in precise canon terms, is a Dementor's kiss? What does it mean when the boy who lived keeps breathing, but no longer lives in any meaningful sense? In the books, the core issue is mechanical. The kiss does not stop the heart, it does not rupture organs, it does not register on a healer's chart as death. The Dementor presses its rotting mouth to the victims, and the soul is pulled free, permanently severed from the body. What remains is technically alive, eyes open, lungs moving, fingers warm to the touch, but the person is gone. No spell in canon, no potion, no ritual has ever reversed it. Dumbledore frames this with terrifying clarity. When Fudge authorizes the kiss for Sirius Black, Dumbledore does not argue about prison terms or legal process. He says bluntly that the Dementor's kiss is a fate worse than death. Hardened Aurors, who face the killing curse, still flinch at the prospect of a kiss order because death has closure, while this has only indefinite vacancy. The subtext is brutal. Death respects the integrity of who you were. The kiss erases it and leaves the body as an ethical problem for everyone else. This is why even the Ministry treats Dementors as a necessary obscenity. They are not pets. They are barely allies. Officially, they guard Azkaban and can be directed to a battlefield. In reality, they drift toward the highest concentration of fear and despair, feeding on hope, joy, and every protective memory that gives human beings psychological structure. The Ministry's control is a fiction maintained on parchment. In practice, these are semi-autonomous predators with paperwork. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated the first time a Dementor ignores a perimeter and glides toward a crying child. Now place Harry at the center of that dynamic. Canon already marks him as uniquely vulnerable. He hears the screams of his parents when Dementors approach, because his trauma is fresher, more exposed. Yet he is also uniquely complicated because his soul is not alone. A fragment of Voldemort's soul is lodged in him, a parasitic echo that does not care about his happiness, only about survival and power. So when a Dementor kisses Harry, what exactly does it consume? Does it strip away Harry's own soul and leave the Horcrux intact, creating a walking vessel animated only by Voldemort's fragment? Does it drag both out in one catastrophic pull, leaving a biologically alive but metaphysically empty shell and tearing a hole in Voldemort's protection? Or, more disturbingly, does it preferentially seize the darker, more fractured piece, maiming the Dark Lord at distance, while Harry's soul is left mangled, half-torn, and unreachable? Here, we deconstruct a timeline where that single mechanical act becomes the turning point. One kiss potentially fulfills the prophecy in a twisted form by damaging Voldemort's soul structure, even as it maims the hero beyond healing. The divergence is finalized. Harry is no longer an agent. He is an object, a body whose inner reality has been rewritten by a creature the law pretends to command. The question for the wizarding world becomes simple and horrifying. Do they treat this body as a martyr, as evidence, or as a weapon? And once both sides realize that Voldemort himself has been destabilized by the same kiss that emptied Harry, the war's moral floor drops away. Who tries to finish what the Dementor started, and who tries to undo it knowing it cannot be undone? The divergence, the night by the lake, goes horribly right. To understand how we arrive at that weaponized absence, we have to walk back to the lake. To the night, the story was supposed to resolve one trauma, and instead fractures the entire timeline. In canon, we know this scene by heart. Harry and Sirius crumple beside the water, magic burned out, the air frosting as Dementors glide in, 100 rotting hands, a ring of hunger, a stag of blinding power that should appear across the lake and sweep them away. Here, the turning point arrives in a single, lethal delay. The Patronus does not come in time. The core issue is mechanical. Dementors do not debate. They do not wait for dramatic symmetry. They follow the nearest, strongest pull of despair and soul fragment resonance. Harry, already harboring a piece of Voldemort, is a beacon. One Dementor breaks formation, its tattered robes dragging ripples in the shallows as it leans over him first. We slow the moment down, the rattling breath, the temperature knifing downward until even thought crystallizes and shatters, the hood lowering, not theatrically, but with the bored efficiency of a predator that has done this 1,000 times. The world narrows to a single, horrible point of contact as its mouth meets his. Sirius is screaming Harry's name, voice breaking into something animal, and Lupin, who should be here, who should be the adult buffer against this exact horror, is absent, lost to his own transformation. What does it mean to watch a soul leave a body? Sirius sees the boy's hands twitch, then still, eyes wide, and fixed on a sky he can no longer interpret. For a man who survived Azkaban, this is the purest psychological torture. The very creature that fed on his worst memories is now extracting the one person who could have made those years make sense. His claim to freedom is structurally annihilated in front of him. He will walk out of this night, but without a reason to. Snape arrives second, cloak snapping, wand already raised for a Patronus that will never be fast enough. He sees the kiss in profile, the Dementor arching back, satiated, Harry's chest still rising. The subtext is brutal. All his years of divided loyalty, of pretending not to care, have produced the one outcome that satisfies neither side. Dumbledore is third, and for once, late. His Patronus clears the swarm with surgical brilliance, but the divergence is finalized. On the ground lies the solution he feared most, a living Harry Potter, breathing, warm, and utterly empty. Even for him, there is no counter-curse, no phoenix tear, no hidden ritual, only policy, because this is not just tragedy, it is scandal. Fudge must now confront a reality he has spent years papering over. Under his administration, a ministry-controlled Dementor has kissed the boy who lived on school grounds, turning his favorite security theater into an international crisis. What was sold as protection has become the most public act of state violence in modern magical history. So the adults stand in a ring around the body, Sirius shaking, Snape expressionless, Dumbledore calculating the new war, Fudge already rehearsing denial. Harry's eyes are open, reflecting the moon, but nothing looks back. The question shifts. Not, how do we save him, but, what do you do with a hero who is alive, but gone? And as his fingers twitch once, reflex without intention, we are forced to ask a darker question still. In a world built on prophecy and power, who is the first to realize that an empty Harry Potter might be more useful than a living one? A soulless Harry, hospital wing, hollow eyes, and shattered friendships. The hospital wing was never built for this. Beds are meant for broken bones and cursed boils, not for a boy who breathes, blinks, and yet is effectively a relic. Harry lies in the nearest bed to Madame Pomfrey's office, eyes open, pupils tracking nothing. The room, usually a place where magic restores order, becomes a mausoleum with good ventilation. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't wake. He simply exists, and that is the horror. Ron Weasley stands at the foot of the bed and discovers that grief without a body is not merciful. It is mechanical. The core issue is mechanical. His best friend is technically alive, heart beating, chest rising, but the dynamic of their trio has been structurally annihilated. Ron's brain keeps trying to file this under near miss, the same folder as chess pieces and giant spiders. His gut refuses. He was not at the lake. He was not there when the turning point arrives, and the Dementor leans in. That absence metastasizes into a specific, vicious narrative. If he had been there, maybe the Patronus would have been stronger. Maybe the fracture in this timeline could have been sealed. So he gets angry at the Dementors, at the Ministry, at Dumbledore, at himself most of all. He snaps at visitors, snarls when someone calls Harry lucky to be alive. Alive compared to what? Hermione refuses to stand still long enough for guilt to harden. She weaponizes it into research. While Ron guards the bed, she raids the library, then Dumbledore's private shelves, then anything vaguely referenced in footnotes about souls, anchors, and the metaphysics of despair. In canon, the Dementor's kiss is described as irreversible. In this fractured reality, Hermione Granger treats irreversible as a challenge, not a conclusion. We watch her stack volumes on Horcrux theory beside treatises on Dementors, trying to map what happens when a creature that devours souls meets a boy who is already carrying a fragment of Voldemort. Does the kiss take both? Does it leave something behind? The subtext is brutal. She is not only arguing with magical theory, she is arguing with Dumbledore's quiet, sorrowful certainty. She refuses to grieve a problem that, in her mind, has not yet been proven unsolvable. Outside the ward, Hogwarts adjusts in the only way institutions know how, through whispers and routine. Students make excuses to deliver homework, to pass by the door, to glimpse the boy who lived, who no longer looks back. Some stare, waiting for a flicker of recognition. Others flinch, as if the absence in his eyes might be contagious. Teachers are worse. McGonagall visits in rigid 10-minute intervals, voice-clipped, syllables precise, as though proper diction can hold reality together. Snape stands in the doorway once, expression unreadable, then leaves without crossing the threshold. Do they address him as a patient, a symbol, or a corpse that hasn't received the memo? And beneath all of this, a quieter, more corrosive question takes root. When someone's body remains, but their soul is gone, how long before the chairs beside the bed stay empty? How long before conversations about him shift into the past tense, even as his chest continues to rise and fall? We deconstruct a timeline in which grief has no clean endpoint, only a long, slow erosion of visits, of hopes, of maybe he'll blink differently today. The divergence is finalized not by the kiss itself, but by the moment the living start to schedule their lives around an absence they can touch. Because if Harry Potter is now an object of fear, of propaganda, of unresolved loyalty, who decides when it is acceptable to move on? And more dangerously, who decides that it is useful not to? Prophecy broken or rewritten, the fate of the chosen one. The answer, inevitably, drags us back to the Hall of Prophecy. What happens to a destiny when its hero is breathing but gone? What happens to a magical contract when one party is present in flesh and absent in soul? The core issue is mechanical. What exactly does the prophecy bind? Reread the wording in this altered reality, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Neither can live while the other survives. The language is cold, structural, almost legalistic. It never mentions Harry's name. It never mentions a soul. It describes a configuration of power, a dynamic between predator and prey, and then it locks the universe into that structure. So when a Dementor presses its rotting face to Harry's and drinks, we have three possible failures. The first is catastrophic. The prophecy shatters because the designated soul is gone. In this case, Harry's body becomes a legal loophole, a corpse on magical life support. Voldemort is unbound. There is no one with the power. The war ceases to be a foretold duel and becomes a conventional terror campaign with no metaphysical backstop. Hope becomes optional, not structural. The second possibility is more insidious. The prophecy enters limbo because Harry technically still survives. His heart beats, his scar remains. The Horcrux fragment may or may not have been consumed in the kiss, but the shell that once housed both souls still walks. Destiny, in this model, is a frozen process. Neither can live while the other survives, yet one of them is no longer truly living. The turning point arrives, and then stalls. The third path is the most narratively volatile. The magic reroutes. The prophecy silently shifts to Neville Longbottom, the alternate candidate whose infancy once met the same conditions. We deconstruct a timeline where Dumbledore sits Neville down in his office, not with the gentle abstractions he offered Harry, but with a blunt statement, "The burden may now rest on you." Concrete action. Neville starts training. Internal consequence. His entire psychological reality fractures and reforms. His clumsy wand work is no longer comic relief. It is a national security concern. Every failed spell is a life he might someday fail to save. His loyalty to the memory of Harry becomes fuel, not shadow, and the subtext is brutal. He is being asked to kill the man his friend once died for. On the other side, Voldemort feels the tremor. If the soul fragment inside Harry is torn, eaten, or merely numbed by the kiss, he experiences a psychic lurch, a sudden absence where a tether used to be. Does that make him more reckless, convinced that destiny has been cheated, or more cautious, aware that the universe has stopped telling him he will be opposed by exactly one boy? Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated at the cosmic level. For the first time, there is no guarantee that Voldemort falls. No destined duel, no narrative rail. If the prophecy has broken, paused, or rerouted, the next phase of this war is terrifyingly simple. He has to be beaten by choice, strategy, and sacrifice alone. So who, in a world without guaranteed victory, volunteers to walk into that void? Dumbledore's impossible choice: martyr, weapon, or hidden boy. So who, in a world without guaranteed victory, volunteers to walk into that void? Dumbledore does, but first, he has to decide what to do with the body that used to be Harry Potter. Three options present themselves, each one an indictment of the war's morality. He can hide Harry completely, treating this empty shell as a son lost to a fate worse than death. He can sanctify him, turning the boy who lived into the boy who was taken, a martyr whose still breathing body is paraded to unify a terrified population. Or, most chillingly, he can refine Harry into a weaponized image, a psychological curse aimed directly at Voldemort and the Dementors that serve him. The core issue is mechanical, visibility. In canon, the Dementor's kiss is whispered about, not televised. Here, Dumbledore has to decide whether to drag that horror into the center of public reality. If the wizarding world sees Harry in St. Mungo's, eyes open but unseeing, does that fracture become a rallying scar, or proof that hope itself can be hollowed out? Rage and unity against the Dementors are possible. So is mass despair. Imagine the structure of a public funeral that is not a funeral. A glass coffin in the ministry atrium, oars in black, a white stag Patronus hovering uselessly above a boy who can no longer cast it. For some, this would crystallize loyalty to the resistance. If they can do this to Harry, no one is safe. For others, the subtext is brutal. If even Harry can be broken, what chance does a clerk in magical maintenance have? Enter the ministry. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated the moment the prophet leaks that a Dementor has kissed Harry Potter. Fudge, or whichever fragile successor is clinging to the office, needs narrative control. A public display of Harry's body can deflect blame onto rogue Dementors, justify sweeping Azkaban reforms, and sell harsher anti-Dementor measures as moral necessity rather than panic. In this timeline, Dementors are not just prison guards, they are political cover. Inside the Order, the fracture becomes personal. Molly Weasley looks at Harry in the hospital wing and does not see a symbol, she sees a son. She demands privacy, protection, a locked ward, and a closed door. Moody, by contrast, has spent a lifetime turning trauma into tactics. Symbols win wars, he growls. Harry's name still terrifies Death Eaters. An image of what Voldemort's allies have done to the boy who lived could turn wavering families, could harden the soft middle that keeps pretending neutrality is safety. We deconstruct a timeline where the argument isn't abstract. Ron refuses to let strangers stare at Harry. Hermione asks whether consent matters when the person can never give it again. Snape, bound to both boy and prophecy, warns that exposing Harry may also expose Voldemort's lingering soul within him. The divergence is finalized not by prophecy, but by committee, and then, late at night, the committee disappears. Dumbledore stands alone in the hospital wing, beside a breathing body that no longer looks back. He rests one hand on Harry's shoulder and whispers that he is about to use the boy one last time. He does not say how. The candles flicker, the door clicks shut, and the war tilts on a decision we are not yet allowed to see. Ron and Hermione. Without Harry, grief, guilt, and a new war strategy. Ron and Hermione do not find out in a meeting, they find out in a corridor. Madame Pomfrey's door opens, Dumbledore steps past them without speaking, and the silence is the verdict. Ron pushes through first, Hermione follows. Harry is there, breathing, eyes open and unfocused, the living proof that the decision in the hospital wing has already been made. The divergence is finalized in that instant. Harry is no longer the gravitational center of their trio. He is an object in the room, a fixed point of trauma that their orbits must now navigate. Ron's reaction is kinetic. He swears at the Ministry, at Dementors, at whatever bureaucrat thought soul removal was an acceptable sanction. Hermione's reaction is internal. She starts making lists. The core issue is mechanical. Dementors are still nominally under Ministry control, still weaponized despair in service of order. Ron externalizes that injustice, volunteering for every Order patrol, demanding Auror training years too early, throwing his body between Hogsmeade and the prison guard creatures that stole his best friend. Hermione attacks the structure. She disappears into the library, into case law, into obscure Department of Mysteries reports on soul magic, slowly assembling a legal and magical campaign to outlaw the kiss entirely. Without Harry mediating, their dynamic loses its buffer. Every disagreement that would once have bounced off Harry's attempts at peace now hits the other person head on. When Ron argues that you beat Dementors with Patronuses and strategy, not paperwork, Hermione fires back that if the law still permits the kiss, then every victory is temporary. Their romantic tension accelerates in the same furnace as their ideological fracture. He wants to hit something. She wants to rewrite reality. The subtext is brutal. Every plan is a referendum on the boy in the bed. In Order meetings, there is an unspoken question hanging over every map and mission. Would Harry have done this, or would he have refused to be used? Ron hears that question as accusation and motivation. It drives him to train until his Patronus is no longer a flicker, but a roaring terrier that can hold a whole squad's morale together. Hermione hears it as a standard she must not betray. It pushes her to design charters, pacts, and protections that treat human souls as inviolable, even in war. Then the pattern interrupt arrives. One night, Hermione breaks her own rule about efficiency. She sits beside Harry's bed, parchment spread across his blanket, and explains the war to him as if he were about to stand up and argue. She outlines a proposal to force the Ministry to sever ties with Dementors, a treaty banning soul-based punishments, contingency plans if Voldemort starts deploying kisses as terror tactics. Harry does not respond. She pauses after each point anyway, waiting for a counter-argument that never comes. Ron watches from the doorway. He sees that Hermione is not just talking to Harry, she is using him as a silent conscience, a sounding board for decisions he can no longer make. In that quiet, their roles crystallize. Hermione as architect of a new moral framework, Ron as the shield that will have to enforce it in the field, and somewhere beyond the hospital wing, Dumbledore is already preparing to test how far they are willing to bend that framework when the war demands Harry's body as more than a symbol. Voldemort's experiment, testing the limits of fear and prophecy. What if, at the exact moment Dumbledore is weighing the ethics of using Harry's body, Voldemort feels something tear, not in the physical sense, in the deep structural architecture of his own fractured soul? When the Dementor's kiss clamps down over Harry's mouth, the Ministry records it as a security failure and a tragic accident. For Voldemort, it lands as a psychic jolt, a wrongness that cuts through his current husk body and every Horcrux anchoring him. For less than a heartbeat, he is not the Dark Lord. He is Tom Riddle again, a boy who has just watched a predator descend on his only mirror. Then the turning point arrives. The pain resolves into information. He does not know Harry has been kissed in the bureaucratic sense. What he knows is that one of his soul fragments has been mauled by something that does not obey his rules of magic. The core issue is mechanical. Horcruxes are engineered to resist destruction by binding soul to object, to body, to reality itself. Yet here, in a dingy ministry corridor, a being bred on despair has bitten into that mechanism and swallowed a piece of him whole. His initial reaction is disbelief. Harry Potter cannot be neutralized by accident. The narrative symmetry offends him. Prophecies do not collapse because some cloaked carrion feeder got overexcited. He paces. He tests his own magic. He probes the remaining anchors. Only when the echo of that tearing fails to repeat does the clinical curiosity set in. What, exactly, did the Dementor consume? If it took Harry's soul and left the fragment, the prophecy may still hold. If it took the fragment and left the boy empty, the prophecy is suddenly defanged. Neither can live while the other survives. Yes, but what if one of them is no longer truly living, merely walking? The subtext is brutal. The universe may have just handed Voldemort a loophole. Strategically, he pivots. With the boy who lived reduced to a breathing relic, he can reallocate obsession into infrastructure. Hogwarts becomes a recruitment ground, not a battlefield. The Ministry is no longer a stage for duels. It is a machine to be hollowed out from within. Gringotts, with its dragon-guarded vaults and ancient contracts, shifts from nuisance to priority target. In this timeline, we deconstruct a timeline where Voldemort stops chasing a child and starts hunting institutions. But he is not finished with Harry. The empty body is an asset. Voldemort moves to capture it, both as experimental subject and symbol. He wants to dissect the interaction between Dementor and Horcrux, to map the psychological and magical residue left in that vacant gaze. He also understands theater. An alive Harry Potter, paraded before the world as a drooling, compliant trophy, would structurally annihilate their claim to normalcy and hope in a single silent gesture. And beneath the arrogance, something colder coils. Fear. For the first time, Voldemort has evidence of a force that does not merely threaten his body or his plans, but his fundamental cheat code against death. Dementors do not just scare souls, they eat them permanently. If they can consume a fragment in Harry, could they devour a locket, a cup, a snake? He finds himself coveting what he should dread, a predator of souls that might be weaponized against enemies, and, if mishandled, against himself. As he orders his followers to track the boy's body and the movements of every Dementor in Britain, one question gnaws at him more viciously than any prophecy. Has he just discovered the only thing in existence that can unmake Lord Voldemort in every timeline, with no Horcrux escape clause at all? Neville's rise, from almost chosen to reluctant hero. So if Voldemort has just found a weapon that can unmake him, what happens to the world that loses its intended wielder? What happens to a prophecy when its primary subject is still breathing, but no longer truly present? In this fracture of the timeline, the vacuum does not stay empty for long. Neville Longbottom has always been the boy who almost mattered. In canon, that phrase is thematic. Here, it becomes structural. The prophecy's wording still hangs over the war, but now every serious mind, from Dumbledore to Voldemort, has to confront an unnerving possibility. If the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord has been spiritually erased, then maybe the prophecy was never a single-thread destiny at all, but a branching mechanism. The divergence is finalized the moment Harry's eyes go glassy and never quite come back. Dumbledore does not announce this to the Great Hall. He brings Neville to his office. McGonagall is already there, jaw tight, hands clenched around a teacup that has long since gone cold. The conversation is quiet, almost painfully so. No trumpets, no new Chosen One ceremony. Dumbledore simply lays out the language of the prophecy, then asks a question that detonates Neville's self-concept. If fate offered two candidates once, who is to say it cannot tilt again? McGonagall, ever the realist, adds the line that actually lands. What you choose to do now matters more than what anyone said about you as a baby. The core issue is mechanical. Neville is not suddenly gifted with raw magical power. His wand work is still hesitant, his memory still unreliable, his toad still missing more often than not. What changes is the reference point. Once a year, then once a term, then once a month, he is taken, under supervision, to visit Harry, St. Mungo's, Grimmauld Place, a hidden order safe house. Different rooms, same reality. Harry sits, breathes, stares. For Neville, this is what failure looks like in this war. Not death, but permanent absence. That image drives his training far more effectively than any prophecy could. Extra defense lessons with Lupin, and later with Tonks focus on fundamentals. Shields held 1 second longer, disarms cast under pressure, stunning spells that do not wobble. When the Patronus charm enters the curriculum, Neville is not chasing glory. He is trying to build a barrier between his friends and the thing that did this to Harry. His first attempts produce only silver mist, but the memory that finally crystallizes into a form is not happy in the conventional sense. It is the moment he realizes Harry still squeezes his hand reflexively when frightened by a loud noise. Loyalty, not triumph, becomes his fuel source. Without Harry at the center, Dumbledore's army needs a different face. It gets Neville's. He does not stride into the room of requirement as a legend. He stumbles in as the boy everyone has seen shaking, then watch stand up anyway. We deconstruct a timeline where Neville's leadership accelerates 2 full years earlier, not because he is fearless, but because his fear is visible, and therefore contagious in reverse. If he can keep going, what excuse does anyone else have? Here the pattern interrupt arrives. In canon, we remember Neville's final charge with the Sword of Gryffindor, the clean narrative of the underdog's triumph. In this reality, every act of bravery is preceded by a glance at an empty bed in Gryffindor Tower that still has a trunk at its foot, at a reserved chair in the DA's circle that no one dares to occupy, before leading a sabotage run on the Carrows, or standing between a first year and a Cruciatus curse. Neville's eyes flick, just once, to that absence. His courage is born not from a belief that he was destined to win, but from the grief of watching what happens when no one is strong enough in time. By the time the war escalates and the castle itself becomes a battleground, Neville is no longer the boy who almost mattered. He is the boy who decided to matter in a world where destiny malfunctioned, and that decision will reshape how both sides calculate their next move. The Dursleys and the empty boy, fear without the magic. Neville's decision to matter reframes heroism inside the castle. But what happens when the supposed hero outside the castle is no longer there at all? What does bravery mean when the boy who lived comes home as an administrative problem rather than a savior? The core issue is mechanical. The Dementor's kiss, in canon, does not kill, it evacuates. The body continues, the soul does not. Magical law, however, is written around bodies, guardianship, and addresses. With no cure in St. Mungo's, no curriculum to offer an unresponsive teenager, and no legal category for prophesied husk, Dumbledore finds himself trapped in bureaucracy. Hogwarts cannot justify keeping a non-student. The Order cannot justify hiding him without consent. This financial technicality forces a brutal conclusion. Harry Potter is, on parchment, still a minor whose guardians live at number 4, Privet Drive. So he is sent back, not as a weapon, as a ward. Vernon and Petunia expect an escalation of the threat. In their heads, magic plus trauma equals volatility, a deranged, unstable wizard boy who might blow the house apart in his sleep. Instead, what arrives on the doorstep is quiet, too quiet. A teenager who walks when guided, sits where placed, eats when prompted, and otherwise stares through walls. No backchat, no accidental magic, no pleading letters from owls asking him to return. The subtext is brutal. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated, not by explosions, but by the presence of someone who no longer participates in reality at all. Petunia's reaction is not cinematic, it is domestic. She notices the way his shoes are slightly too small because no one thought to buy new ones. She notices that his eyes track movement without recognition, the same way she once watched Lily's coffin descend while knowing her sister technically still existed in photographs and memories. This is not death. This is a fracture that never seals. Resentment surges first. Lily's world has invaded her kitchen again, this time as unpaid permanent care work. But buried under the acid is an old, unprocessed grief. She understands, in a way Dumbledore never could, what it means to live beside a ghost who still needs feeding. Vernon, by contrast, refuses the category of ghost entirely. He reaches for structure. Harry will be woken at 7, dressed, seated at the table, perhaps taken to a specialist, first, if needed. He declares, loudly and often, that the boy is in some sort of coma, a medical issue, nothing to do with those Dementor things. Under his roof, there will be no mention of souls, prophecies, or the kiss. If magic broke the boy, then denying magic is, in Vernon's mind, the only power he has left, and Dudley watches. He is older now, post-Dementor encounter, post-canonical terror in the alleyway. He remembers cold that reached his bones, and a happiness being dragged out of him. When he stands in Harry's doorway at night, the dynamic is unrecognizable. The cousin who once represented everything Dudley feared and envied about power is now the most powerless person he has ever seen. Harry does not flinch when Dudley steps closer. He does not brace for a punch. He does not do anything. The turning point arrives in silence. Dudley realizes that, for the first time, he could do absolutely anything to Harry, and there would be no resistance, no witness, no magic to push back. And instead of triumph, something else moves in his chest, a slow, unfamiliar pressure that feels dangerously close to loyalty. He reaches out, hesitates over Harry's shoulder, then pulls his hand back before contact. We deconstruct a timeline from this hesitation, because in that tiny, aborted gesture lies the question that will decide Privet Drive's next fracture. Will Dudley become his cousin's new jailer, or his only guard? A body turned symbol, how the wizarding world uses. Harry Dudley does not answer that question. The wizarding world does it for him. In the months after the kiss, Harry's body is quietly relocated, his medical chart sealed under more enchantments than the Department of Mysteries uses on time-turners. Officially, the Ministry issues a statement of tragic sacrifice in the fight against Dementor terror, complete with a tasteful black and silver poster, Harry in profile, wand raised. No mention of Azkaban negligence or a guard's panicked miscast Patronus. Tragedy, they imply, was inevitable. Accountability, they imply, is impractical. But reality leaks. It always does. Aurors talk, healers drink. Within weeks, the Order's version circulates in whispers. The Dementor wasn't a rogue monster. It was a weapon pointed by policy. Dementor deployment at Azkaban. Dementor presence at Little Whinging. Dementor deterrence in Muggle neighborhoods. Suddenly, these are not obscure legal debates, but the architecture of a crime. The subtext is brutal. Harry was not only attacked by Voldemort, he was failed, procedurally, by the very structure meant to protect him. Underground, the divergence is finalized in ink and spellotape. Someone in Nocturne prints illegal posters. Harry's vacant eyes. The lightning scar stark against washed-out skin. 3 words beneath in block letters. This is what they do. They appear overnight on brick walls, over Ministry safety notices, on the side of the night bus. His scar becomes a sigil, stylized into jagged graffiti on alleyways and bathroom stalls, a warning and a dare simultaneously. The core issue is mechanical. A resistance needs symbols to coordinate power, to compress a sprawling timeline of trauma into something you can whisper at a door. Harry's name becomes a password, for Potter, by Harry's light, the boy who was kissed, phrases that open hidden cellars and trigger warded passageways. Children pass rumors of a secret spell where tracing his scar in the air alerts the Order. It isn't true, but the belief itself has operational value. Yet beneath the tactical advantage sits an ethical sinkhole. Is it moral to build morale around someone who cannot consent, cannot object, cannot even blink in recognition when his own wanted poster is repurposed as revolutionary art? When Ron uses Harry's name to authenticate a new recruit, when Hermione drafts pamphlets contrasting the official narrative with the Order's dossier of Dementor abuses, they are, in effect, weaponizing a person who can no longer say no. Pattern interrupt. Picture a cramped candlelit kitchen in a safe house outside Ottery St. Catchpole. A young witch, 5th year, voice shaking with zeal, calls Harry our sleeping saint, says his empty body is the price of awakening. The room hums with grim approval, until Ron Weasley slams his mug down so hard the candles flicker. "Stop," he says, and the word lands heavier than any spell. He tells them Harry drools, that his hands curl in on themselves, that the boy who lived flinches from nothing now, not even thunder. "He isn't a saint," Ron snaps. "He's my best friend, and he's lying in a bed, alone, while you turn him into a slogan." Silence follows, thick and embarrassed. The Revolution has just been reminded that its banner is a body. Over years, the psychological fracture widens. New Hogwarts intakes, who never saw Harry argue with Snape or laugh over treacle tart, grow up on stories of the boy who was kissed, a figure closer to a medieval relic than a messy teenager. They swap tales of how staring at his scar in a smuggled photograph grants courage before exams or duels. For them, the legend is primary, the person is apocrypha. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated at Hogwarts itself, where once first years saw a living Harry at the Gryffindor table, now they see his portrait in the entrance hall, wand raised in a moment that never truly happened, curated for maximum inspiration. The castle's magic, its moving staircases and whispering portraits, collaborates in the myth-making. Teachers reference what Harry endured as though he chose it, as though endurance is consent retroactively granted. We deconstruct a timeline from here and notice a generational split in loyalty. Older students, who remember him falling off his broom, who saw him sulk, rage, and break school rules, resist the sanctification. Younger ones, raised on slogans and sanitized stories, treat questioning the myth as blasphemy. Hermione, who lives in the tension between those worlds, begins writing a private essay she never publishes, a treatise on post-consent heroism and the ethics of symbolic warfare. Meanwhile, Dudley visits the closed ward and sits beside the bed that powers half the Resistance's recruitment speeches. He watches healers adjust charms, while, in another part of the country, that same unmoving hand is reproduced on badges, banners, and clandestine zines. The turning point arrives when Dudley realizes that every new poster makes it harder to imagine Harry as anything but a symbol. The more powerful the story becomes, the more impossible it is to bring the person back. And yet, the war demands stories. So the question that hangs over the next phase of this conflict is not simply who will fight Voldemort in Harry's absence, but whether anyone will dare to dismantle a legend that has become strategically indispensable and emotionally irreversible. Endgame, without Harry, war, sacrifice, and a different victory. So what does a war look like when its central myth cannot raise a wand, cannot even understand that a war is happening around him? What happens when the boy who lived is physically present at Hogwarts, but only as a breathing monument to failure and necessity? The Battle of Hogwarts, in this timeline, is not a duel between destined equals. It is a siege run by logisticians. McGonagall, not Harry, becomes the visible axis of resistance. She turns the castle into a weapon, stone, and spell working in concert. Hermione and Ron, having spent months treating Harry's body as a strategic liability and emotional anchor, shift fully into command. The core issue is mechanical. Without a prophesied champion, the defense relies on corridors, choke points, and a DA that has trained to fight as a coordinated swarm rather than as backup dancers to a singular hero. Neville steps into the vacuum, Harry leaves, but not as a narrative copy. He is not the chosen one, in name. He is the man who keeps walking after everyone else breaks. He organizes the Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors into rotating squads, weaponizes his knowledge of herbology into living barricades and toxic traps, and turns the Room of Requirement into a mobile triage center. The divergence is finalized when, instead of waiting for Harry to return from the forest, they plan as if no miraculous arrival is coming, because in this reality, it is not. Sacrifice, in this structure, also shifts. Snape's double life cannot hinge on passing memories to a boy who will understand them. His guilt over Lily, and over what happened to Harry, drives him toward a more overtly redemptive ending. Picture him walking into the Great Hall during a lull, facing Voldemort in front of students, not as a spy unmasked, but as a traitor declaring himself. He knows he cannot win that duel. The point is to expose Voldemort's fear of Dementors, of damaged soul fragments, in public view. McGonagall, freed from the hope that Harry will solve the problem, takes the field herself. We deconstruct a timeline where she duels Voldemort long enough for others to enact a different plan, forcing him into proximity with the one thing he cannot rationalize: Harry's Dementor-kissed body and the creatures that made it. Because the Order has learned something horrifying and practical. Dementors do not simply terrify, they consume soul. If they took Harry's, what did they do to the Horcrux inside him? The subtext is brutal. This financial technicality forces the good side to consider weaponizing the same entities that destroyed their symbol. Lure Voldemort toward the lake, break his control, let his own fractured soul become collateral damage when the Dementors swarm. Even if it works, the victory is mutilated. Voldemort falls, perhaps screaming as his remaining fragments are shredded in a feeding frenzy of despair. But there is no Harry to step forward, no wand raised in shaky triumph. There is only a body in the infirmary that stares at the ceiling, uncomprehending, while people whisper his name as if it is both prayer and apology. So is this world stronger because it discovered that courage does not need prophecy to exist? Or is it permanently scarred because its greatest symbol never got to live his own ending? The next question is unavoidable. When a society wins without its chosen hero, does it finally grow up? Or does it spend the rest of its history building monuments to the boy who never came back? Living with the what if, legacy, ethics, and your version of the story. In this fractured reality, the war ends with a victory that feels almost hypothetical. The boy who lived does not die in a blaze of green light. He simply stops being present. His body survives. His soul does not. So we deconstruct a timeline. The first fracture is at the lake. The Dementor's kiss lands, not as a near miss, but as a completed sentence, and the subtext is brutal. The prophecy either shatters on contact or rewrites itself in silence. From there, Dumbledore is forced into an impossible decision. Does he hide Harry's shell, elevate it as a symbol, or treat it as a patient no magic can reach? The divergence is finalized when he chooses containment over display, and the world refuses to fully agree. The core issue is mechanical. A prophecy that says, neither can live while the other survives, never specifies whether live means biologically active or spiritually intact. If Harry is breathing but empty, is Voldemort still bound to him, or suddenly unshackled? In this version, that uncertainty creates a power vacuum. Neville rises into it, not because a wand chooses him, but because reality demands someone stand where Harry cannot. The Ministry scrambles, the Order recalibrates, and Voldemort experiments, probing the edges of what a soulless enemy can still mean. Around that central absence, the dynamics warp. At Privet Drive, their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated when the Dursleys confront a powerless Harry who cannot flinch, cannot argue, cannot even hate them back. Ron and Hermione are forced to decide whether loyalty means clinging to a body or redirecting their grief into Neville's campaign. Snape's entire psychological architecture, built on protecting Lily's son, has to transfer, collapse, or curdle. By the altered endgame, the war is won by people who were never named on any sphere of glass. Underneath the plot mechanics, the themes sharpen. This is a world that has to distinguish between living and merely surviving, between a breathing body and an actual person. It exposes the danger of turning people into symbols, especially when the symbol can no longer consent. It argues that heroism can emerge from those who were never prophesied. Neville, a terrified Auror recruit, a muggle nurse in a closed ward, even a reformed Death Eater who refuses to abandon an unresponsive boy. So, what would you have done? Faced with a kissed Harry, would you have hidden him away in some closed St. Mungo's wing, displayed him in a hospital bed as a reminder of Dementor terror, or broken every law to chase forbidden soul magic? Do you think the prophecy cleanly shifts to Neville, or collapses entirely, leaving the war to be decided by ordinary fear and ordinary courage? In the comments, choose your own turning point for the kiss. Does it happen at the Azkaban Lake, during the Ministry battle, or as a deliberate experiment by Voldemort himself? And how does that single decision reshape one character's arc? Maybe it hardens Hermione into a political revolutionary, or forces Petunia to confront the exact fate she once feared for Lily. If you want more of this kind of structural meddling with canon, subscribe for deeper alternate history explorations of the wizarding world, where we take familiar magic and stress test its rules. Next, watch our breakdown of a universe where Dudley Dursley becomes Hogwarts' most unlikely protector, and the Dursley war with magic ends not with a duel, but with a handshake. In a world where Harry's soul is gone, the real magic is what everyone else chooses to become. The question is, in that world, who would you be if the next Dementor turned its face toward you?